title of the article that I'll present is Context-Dependent Memory in Two Natural Environments on Land and Underwater. This is Experiment 1 of Badley and Godden, 1975. Context-dependent memory is the idea that what is learned in a given environment is best recalled in that environment. So think of the example of learning information in a particular classroom. The idea is that your performance on a test should be better if the test is in the same classroom than if it's in a different classroom. So we can state the context-dependent memory hypothesis like this. Performance when learning and recall take place in the same environment should be better than when learning and recall take place in a different environment. Here are the results that this hypothesis predicts. So again, performance when learning and recall take place in the same environment, represented by these two bars, should be better than when learning and recall take place in a different environment, represented by these two bars. So Badley and Godden mentioned that prior to their study, findings concerning context-dependent memory were inconsistent. Some researchers found evidence for it, some researchers didn't. They also mentioned that when there was evidence for context-dependent memory, the studies suffered from low ecological validity. Ecological validity is the degree to which results are applicable to the real world and are not limited to artificial conditions of the lab. Here's a rather extreme example of artificial lab conditions with this guy sort of strapped into this apparatus. So the idea is that if a finding has ecological validity, it generalizes to the real world, to natural environments outside of the lab. So, given this, the goal of Badley and Godden's research was to investigate context-dependent memory in two natural environments, on land and underwater. The subjects in Experiment 1 were 18 members of a diving club. The study took place near Oban, Scotland. Here's a picture of an open water diving site near Oban, Scotland. The design of the experiment included two independent variables. The learning environment, whether it was on land and therefore dry, or underwater and therefore wet, and the recall environment, whether it was on land and therefore dry, or underwater and therefore wet. It was a completely within subjects design, meaning that each subject was in each of the four conditions, and the dependent variable was the number of words correctly recalled. The apparatus included communication sets that were used to present lists of words. Each of the word lists had 36 words. The words were separated by intervals of 2 seconds and blocked into groups of 3 with 4-second intervals between the blocks to allow for the subjects, when they were underwater, to breathe. And the lists were audio recorded. Here was the procedure. It began with breathing pattern instructions telling when the subjects to breathe and how to space their breathing so that they could hear the words. After that, the word list was presented for the first time, Then there was a 10-second pause for unconstrained breathing, literally so the subjects, when they were underwater, could catch their breath. After that, the breathing pattern instructions were repeated. Following that, the word list was presented for a second time. Then 15 digits were presented, and using special boards that had been laminated and pencils that could be used underwater, the subjects copied the digits at a rate of 2 digits per second. The reason for including this was to remove the word lists from short-term memory. Next, the subjects were given the instruction, ascend to the shore station. There was a 4-minute delay, and finally, subjects were instructed to recall the words in any order they could remember, and were given 2 minutes to do so. There was 1 condition per session for each subject, and at least 24 hours between the sessions. So, to review, the context-dependent memory hypothesis states that performance when learning and recall take place in the same environment, here and here, should be better than when learning and recall take place in a different environment, here and here. So these are the results that are predicted by this hypothesis, and here is what Badley and Godden actually found. There were no main effects of either learning environment or of recall environment, but there was a significant interaction between these two independent variables. Here are the results from the actual paper. So another way to state what Badley and Godden found is that performance when learning and recall took place in the same environment was better, significantly, than when learning and recall took place in a different environment. So the conclusion is that results are, quote, clearly in line with the context-dependent memory hypothesis. This despite limited control over experimental conditions. For example, the subjects were tested at different times, and one subject nearly got run over by an amphibious DUKW, which is this. Certainly not something that you would want to get run over by, and something that might distract you from trying to remember a list of words. So despite having limited control of the experimental conditions, Badley and Godden still found evidence for context-dependent memory. Thanks.